This rewind is brought to you by shirts. Shirts, I have them now. Hello and welcome to Brave Souls Rewind, the show where I 200 older characters so you don't have to. Today I'll be going over a character I've actually had for quite some time now, but was dreading actually filming this rewind. I don't know why, but in my head I just figured he wasn't that good. However, we recently got a new Kensei, also tech, so now I figured it's time to see whether the old one is still usable. Now as always, we started with the normal attack damage build, a build that's supposed to be Kensei's strong suit, since he has a normal attack damage link and a higher attack than SP. And boy was it ever. This build was actually usable. I actually really like this build. Now don't get me wrong, it's not a perfect build, there are definitely some flaws. But in terms of damage and speed, I would say that it's really not lacking either. For one thing, usually when you get a character that's this fast with his normal attack, there are a few hits somewhere in the string that do half damage to compensate. This character does not have that. Every single hit does full damage. And it's quite a bit of damage too, seeing as he actually has a usable killer, and his attack really is not that bad. But like I said, there are some problems with this build, such as the only 15% bruiser and the lack of range. You don't really notice the bruiser part, especially since it's actually a decent amount of damage that's being dealt. But you do notice the lack of range, since you only ever hit a few enemies at a time. Still, the speed and damage that this enemy has kind of makes up for it, and I would say it's still a viable build, at least for single player. Though I do think that multiplayer would have a bit too many enemies. Next up we have the strong tech damage build, and I was completely blown away by the NAD build and how good it was, at least compared to what I thought it was gonna be. So at this point I really had no expectations, since I thought the other build was gonna suck. In the end, this build also surprised me. The strong tech still did a decent amount of damage, and some of them did end up knocking out some enemies in a single shot. But the reason this build surprised me was the fact that his normal attack was actually still usable, despite not having that boost. In fact, there was a combination of both the normal attack and the strong attack that made this build kind of work. Now whether or not it's still viable is kind of up in the air, since I think the only reason I was able to do this well with this build was because I was up against the wrong cars and I had that 20% boost. The strong attacks themselves actually dealt a decent amount of damage, but they didn't have that great a range, and most of the time the only purpose they really served was to knock the enemies down. Realistically, you might get more out of this if you just build him in a NAD build, but without a chappy. Bleep bloop. Now finally we have the strong attack recharge build, and this one was kind of in a similar situation as the last one, except with far less damage since I didn't have the boost going for me. Sure, every now and then I would take out an enemy in a single shot, but it was really rare. Most of the enemies went down with a few strong attacks, or I would have to actually switch over to my normal attack to finish the job. I will say this build was a little better for knocking them over, and then picking them off one by one with my NAD, but it's not exactly what I would call viable, since you can get a whole lot more from a NAD build. In the end, this character actually did surprise me. I did not expect any of his builds to be remotely viable, and not only was one of them still usable, but his strong attack damage build also had a few things going for it. Honestly, I'm actually really excited for this character to get resurrected, because only increasing the range and the bruiser and berserker by a bit would definitely make this character still usable in every way. That is assuming that he's been getting the same increase in stats as the rest of the resurrected characters. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit like and subscribe to the channel, and let me know what other characters you want to see in a rewind.